Welcome to my series of basketball videos where I'll be comparing various NBA grades against each other. I'm doing this because I find that a lot of the basketball videos comparing players on YouTube are too focused on the big names, and sometimes compare players from different positions. For example, lots of people compare Jordan to LeBron and Kobe to Duncan, just because of their similar levels of achievements, but since those players play different positions and have different styles of play, it's not an interesting comparison. In this series, I want to do a comparison not between just more well-known players, but players from days past, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and even the ABA as well, that most modern fans probably do not have too much knowledge about. Also, as much as possible, I want to compare players that play similar positions and have similar play styles. To me, that's a more interesting and fruitful comparison. I'll be using 6 different metrics to compare each player. The first category is scoring. This category will be defined by each player's career points per game, peak points per game, both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of scoring titles. Rebounding. This category will be defined by each player's career rebounds per game, peak rebounds per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of rebounding titles. Passing. This category will be defined by each player's career assists per game, peak assists per game both regular season and playoffs, and number of assist titles. Efficiency and advanced metrics. This category will be defined by each player's career true shooting percentage per and win shares per 48, both in the regular season and playoffs. The reason I use true shooting percentage is because it's more fair to guards. Field goal percentage tends to be biased to big men because of their height and play style closer to the basket. I also put in win shares per 48 here because it encompasses efficiency along with other attributes to give you an idea of how many wins a player contributes to his team. Defense. This category will be defined by each player's all defensive selections, defensive win shares, and defensive player of the year awards. The reason I'm not using blocks and steals in this comparison is because I want to compare the achievements of older players that modern fans might not have too much knowledge about, and players in the 1960s and early 1970s do not have steals and blocks tracked. Awards. This category will be defined by All-Star appearances, All-NBA selections, MVPs, Finals MVPs, and championships as the first, second, or third best player. The reason I have to only count championships as a top 3 player on the team is because otherwise, you get into the situation where, for example, Robert Horry has 7 rings and Karl Malone has 0, and it's not representative of how much better a player is if they weren't a top 3 player on their team contributing to a championship. I know including All-Star selections is a little bit controversial because it's fan-voted, but ultimately, this is what the Hall of Fame uses in their criteria to induct a player, as unfair as it sounds. Also, I'll be including ABA stats and awards and using them as equivalent to their respective NBA stats and awards. The only one that's different about the ABA is that instead of Finals MVP, they have Playoffs MVP, which honestly is a better idea than Finals MVP since it accounts for the whole playoffs, but just to keep it simple, I'll be referring to the ABA Playoffs MVP as Finals MVP here. Also, no All-NBA third team selections are counted, because All-NBA third teams weren't added until the late 80s, which is unfair to older players. Also, I'm not using any career total stats because that's a longevity thing. For example, no one would say that Karl Malone was a better scorer than Michael Jordan, even though he has more total points. And of course, this is only going to be my opinion from comparing the available metrics, since I have not watched most of these players live, or even been born when some of these players have been playing. And to keep it fair, I'm judging them based on how they did in their own era. No time travel or what if this NBA player played in today's era or the 1960s, none of that. I'll be strictly basing their stats and accomplishments within their own era against that era's competition, which makes the most sense to me. So I hope you guys enjoy this comparison video and hopefully learn something new from it. In the 24th episode of the series, we take a look at 2 all-time shooting guards from the 2000s, contemporaries who played very differently but who both garnered their own share of devoted NBA fans. Both players exemplify 2 different ways of playing the shooting guard position. Ray Allen is known as one of the greatest shooters in NBA history, a marksman who now ranks 2nd all-time in 3-pointers made, and as a key offensive piece for 3 different teams, the Milwaukee Bucks, Seattle Supersonics, and Boston Celtics, before finishing his career coming off the bench for the Big 3 Miami Heat. Tracy McGrady's story is quite a bit different, an explosive, dynamic scorer who lit up the scoreboards as a member of the Orlando Magic and Houston Rockets, but who flamed out quickly once the injuries started piling up. So which player had the overall better career? Let's find out. In the scoring category, both players are all-time shooting guards, so they can definitely score with the best of them. Allen in his prime with the Bucks and Sonics was a top 5 shooting guard in the league. He averaged a modest 18.9 points per game for his career, but peaked at a substantial 26.4 points per game in 2007, and averaged 16.1 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at 26.5 points per game in 2005. T-Mac, on the other hand, was known as one of the top scorers in the league in his prime, leading the league in scoring twice. He averaged 19.6 points per game for his career, but peaked at a league-leading 32.1 points per game in 2003, and his averages go up even more in the playoffs, averaging 22.2 points per game, peaking at a Kobe-like 33.8 points per game in 2001. It could be said that T-Mac in his prime was on the same level as Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, and Allen Iverson, while Allen trailed just a bit behind those guys and maybe on the same level as Vince Carter during that era. So although Allen was definitely a top scorer of his era, I would still put T-Mac a bit ahead of him in his prime and give this one to T-Mac. In the rebounding category, it usually comes down to hustle and athleticism. While Allen was a decent rebounder for his position, averaging 4.1 for his career, peaking at 5.2 boards per game in 2001, and 3.8 per game in the playoffs, peaking at a substantial 7.3 rebounds per game in 1999, T-Mac was definitely the more athletic superstar, averaging considerable 5.6 rebounds per game for his career, peaking at an SF-like 7.9 boards per game in 2002, and 5.7 rebounds per game for the playoffs, peaking at an impressive 8.2 rebounds per game in 2008. T-Mac was one of the best rebounding shooting guards of all time, perhaps equaled only by Michael Jordan and Clyde Drexler in that department, so I'll have to give this category to T-Mac. In the passing category, both players handled playmaking a bit more than the typical shooting guard would. Ray Allen was actually the main playmaker for a few seasons with the Bucks and Sonics, and so averaged decent assist numbers. He averaged 3.4 assists per game for his career, but peaked at 4.8 assists per game in 2004, but only 2.6 assists per game in the playoffs, but peaking at a substantially higher 6 assists per game in the 2001 playoffs. However, T-Mac throughout his entire career was an even more willing passer and capable distributor, and at times handled the ball as often as a point guard would. He averaged 4.4 assists per game for his career, but peaked at 6.5 assists per game in 2007, and 5 assists per game for the playoffs, peaking at a point guard like 8.3 assists per game in 2001. So although Allen was a very capable passer, T-Mac was an even more willing passer, and thus I'll have to give this category to T-Mac as well. In the efficiency category, this one's a bit more interesting because although Ray Allen was obviously the better shooter of the two, T-Mac had the higher PER and a similar win shares per 48. Ray Allen was and is known as one of the greatest shooters of all time, able to hit from anywhere on the floor, while T-Mac played quite a bit differently, getting most of his looks from drives, dunks, and layups, although he added a bit of range later in his career as well. I think that although despite T-Mac's higher PER, it's quite obvious from watching them play that overall Allen was a more efficient player, and thus I'll have to give this category to him. In the defense category, neither player made any all-defensive teams, but it is noteworthy that they have nearly the same total number of defensive win shares, despite Allen having played almost 400 more games than T-Mac did. T-Mac's defense wasn't Defensive Player of the Year material, but he definitely put some work into the defensive end, especially in the early part of his career. So I have to give this category to T-Mac as well. In the awards category, we have to recognize that T-Mac is considered one of the great talents never to win a title. Although he played with superstars such as his cousin Vince Carter in Toronto and later on with Yao Ming in Houston, he never quite got the roster help he needed when he was in his prime in Orlando, and he and Yao were rarely both healthy at the same time. Unfortunately, T-Mac's career ended prematurely from various back and knee injuries. T-Mac's career is chock full of what-ifs, and in many interviews, T-Mac himself often notes about how many regrets and missed opportunities he had in his career. Despite this, he had many more All-NBA first and second team selections than Allen did, who only had one All-NBA second team selection. However, Allen was much more durable than T-Mac and thus had more All-Star selections, and most importantly was a top 3 player on a championship team, teaming up with Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett to form the Big 3 Celtics. Allen would get another championship with the Big 3 Miami Heat before he retired, and although I do recognize his contributions and his clutch shot in the 2013 finals, I do not count that one since it came off the bench for them. In the end, I think Allen's one Celtics championship and his substantial All-Star appearances equal out to T-Mac's significant lead in all NBA selections. Thus, I'll have to call this category a tie. So when all the categories are summed up, T-Mac takes the scoring, rebounding, passing, and defense categories, while Allen takes the efficiency category, with the awards category being a tie, giving T-Mac the advantage here. Ray Allen has a substantial legacy, being widely considered one of the greatest shooters and clutch players in NBA history, while being a Bucks and Sonics legend and a vital part of 2 different championship team rosters, while Tracy McGrady is seen as a talent unfulfilled, an explosive, unguardable, athletic scorer in his prime, a legend for the Magic and Rockets who never quite lived up to his expectations. It's interesting that the NBA decided that Ray Allen was worthy of inclusion on their 75th anniversary team, but T-Mac was not. And again, it can be seen as another contrast of a lengthy, more consistent career versus a shorter but more dominant one. Which career would you rather choose? I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and as always, stay tuned for the next comparison video.